Okay, today is October 28th, 2011. My name is Mary Larson, and we're here with Jerry Dunn from the class of 1961. We are at the Edmund Lowe Library today as part of the homecoming festivities. Mrs. Dunn, thank you so much for agreeing to do this today. We really appreciate it. Welcome back to OSU for your 50th reunion.
Thank you.
Were there some special reasons you decided to come back for this particular reunion?
Well, this was my hometown, first of all, and we live in Dallas, so it's a convenient trip to visit friends that are, some of them living here, and we're going to stay with them. And we're football fans, sports fans. My husband is a golf professional, so sports is a venue we love, and that's why we're here.
Okay. So what are some of the things you're looking forward to seeing or doing while you're back in Stillwater?
Well, we always, even as we came in town, it's always just fun to see these familiar spots and how the names have changed of some of the places that are the campus life. Well, we didn't have Eskimo Joe's, but on that same street was a place called Swims on the corner. And then it became something else even while we were here, and there was a chili bowl in one of the houses that we would always have some lunch in, and how the buildings have changed, some of them, not all of them, but many, many new buildings. Mm-hmm. And this was a brand new building when I started here, as was the Student Union.
Doesn't have that new building smell anymore.
No, it doesn't. In fact, yes, that's true.
Now, you mentioned that you grew up in Stillwater. Can you tell me a little bit about your early years?
Well, the early years, my mother was a teacher, a widow, and we moved here when I was 5 or 6 because she wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to go to college if her circumstances never changed. So that's why we were in Stillwater. She got an opportunity to teach at their high school, and it was a college town. So that was the plus.
Mm-hmm. What subjects did your mother teach?
She was first an English teacher and didn't like the 7th grade boys and the way they didn't like English. So she got her master's in business so that they needed to learn to type and shorthand because they were going to work. Mm-hmm. So they were serious students.
Mm-hmm. So you grew up around all of this on campus.
Yes.
What were your impressions of campus when you were a youngster?
Well, you just took it for granted. It was here. It was part of your backyard. You played here. You went here. In fact, all of our girlfriends in junior high, we would meet and pay 50 cents to sit in the end zone at the football games for the college. And it was always fun because my maiden name was Lewis. And I always thought, well, maybe the Lewis Field at that time was someone in my family, and it wasn't. But, you kind of thought, well, maybe that's a good name to have. Mm-hmm. So my name was Jerry Lewis. Mm-hmm. So in that time, he was the comedian of the moment, and I won many elections with that name.
Well, and we'll talk a little bit about your political involvement on campus as we go through this. You came to OSU because it was your hometown university?
Actually, no. I had an opportunity. A lot of my family had gone to Texas Christian, mm-hmm. and when it just came down to the wire, I knew too much about it here, and it was very comfortable, and all my friends were going. Everybody went here. So we scattered into different sororities, different groups, different things in college, but it was the best place to go as far as we were concerned.
Mm-hmm. What was your major?
My major was elementary education, but I had minor in both English and business. So my mother made sure I got the business, and I liked the English, and then I needed to know that I could teach. And I did. So that was good. It was great education.
Very practical set of degrees.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any scholarships or a job?
I had a scholarship, which it was a county scholarship, I think, at that time, $100. And as we've been looking at what the different tuitions are places, and it was giving the 1961 tuition, it's mind-boggling to think that we probably went for about $1,000 a year. And that was it was probably less than that because I didn't live in the dorm. Mm-hmm. I did live in the sorority house part of the time. Whenever someone would go out to teach, I would live for 6 weeks, and maybe one year I lived the whole year. But I loved that. I loved being on campus and being an only child. That was exciting and wonderful to be out with everybody else. So it was fun.
And your mother was continuing to teach in the high school?
Yes, she was. And in the
full-time?
meantime, she had married, and he had gone to college here. He had been raised here. And she had she finished at Northeastern State Teachers College, but she got her master's here after we had moved here.
So you have some very deep roots.
Yes, very much so.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the classes that you particularly remember?
Well, some of the classes, there were some very interesting classes. One of my favorite was sociology with Dr. Mays. I remember his name particularly. And also economics. I do not remember his name. It was a Russian kind of name. I can see him still. And I remember it was a real foreign subject for me at the time. At that time, you didn't pay too much attention. No one in the family talked too much about stocks or economics or the world situation. And I remember taking almost verbatim notes and then going home and typing them up. So by having studied them twice, then when I reviewed them, I made an A in the class. Not because I knew so much, but because I had really studied and wanted to know. So it was a very valuable class for me, and it has had a continued interest for me since that time. And the sociology, of course, would be fascinating for all of us. We weren't talking much psychology or sociology in those times. And he was quite a maverick in his field, and I think, not in my particular class, but I think he had a woman of ill repute from somewhere in the area come and speak to the class. And that, of course, caused a total buzz all over campus. And, it was a business, so it was a sociological study, so to speak. So anyway, for that time, it was quite unusual to have that happen.
So he
had a lot of good teachers, a lot of good professors.
So there were people doing some cutting edge things.
Oh, yes, definitely, definitely.
Were there any other faculty members that you felt were influential in your development?
Yes, there was a marriage class, and that was fascinating. Things were just not talked about much in those days. You saw your own relationships, but you never thought too much about it, your family relationships. And of course, every girl came to college in those days thinking they were going to marry. I didn't come to get married, but I knew that probably I hoped to. And it was a fascinating class, and met lots of interesting people talking about lots of different things. And that was a very practical class, I thought, and I loved all my English classes. The Chaucer class with, I think it was Dr. Douglas, was wonderful. And the Milton, I had a Milton class, and I think maybe he was the one that did Paradise Lost, and those were things that were really brand new for me, and yet I loved the literature. So that was a special part of the college. But my mother had not wanted to teach it, so I didn't determine to teach it either. But I wanted to know it. So that was very special. Those classes were great.
And hence the mixture of your degree.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where were most of your classes as far as buildings go? I mean,
let's see. They were in the, oh my goodness. They were right there by the student union. A lot of them were in the student union, by the student union, the first building there. I can't remember the name of it. I had some in Gardner, which at the time I believe was an English, not Gardner, Morrill was education at that time. And I think in the meantime it has been something else. But there was a lot of walking. I lived at the far end of university, and we walked everywhere. Never could wear pants on campus except Fridays.
Okay.
Certainly different than today. Mm-hmm. And there were lots of cold winter days, and you walked to class and the wind was blowing, and you saw your classmates all over campus. It was a relatively small, almost private school size at that time. It was probably less than 10,000, maybe 10,000. So it was small classes, and we had there were still lots of international students because of the .4 program that Dr. Bennett had set up, and I was very familiar with that because my best friend's father was vice president, Dr. Darlow, and she and I actually in high school served the banquet through the student union, got 50 cents an hour by serving Haile Selassie when he was here for his visit to the campus with the Point Four program, which that our agriculture departments were teaching Ethiopia and many of the other Point Four programs in the world how to do agriculture.
Mm-hmm. That must have been very exciting.
It was.
What do you remember from that event?
Oh, I remember. We were in our little uniforms, and we were earning 50 cents an hour. We were probably juniors or seniors in high school, and everybody signed up to do it. And a lot of us had worked there in the summers when they'd have conventions at the college anyway. And, it was, we weren't necessarily serving the room where he was because it was a big event, but we got to see him, and we watched the other room where he was, and it was fun. It was it was a very memorable occasion for us to see a world leader at that time making, not that he made a difference later, but he did at that time because he was listening to some of the things in the Western attitudes and the Western ways to improve his country.
And we've done a series of interviews with some of the families that had gone over as part of the Point Four program.
Oh, good. Okay.
How aware were students of what was going on with the Point Four program?
I don't know that there was a lot of awareness. I wasn't, greatly aware of it. It was, we knew the university was very involved worldwide. And that was certainly a point of pride. We were happy to do that, to have had that part of our culture, and to have had so many international students. In high school even, we had an organization called IUO, International Understanding Organization, in which we would have speakers come who were the foreign and international students would come, and we would have foods and they would tell us about their country and all that. So that it was a very open kind of town in that regard.
Do you remember any of the Ethiopian exchange students who were?
Yes. Oh my goodness, I wish I'd known to think of it earlier. He was from Pakistan, and he was really a best friend of one of my good friends, Tommy Hanks. It hasn't come to me. I can't remember what his name was.
Fill it in later.
But he was a very nice person, and I'm sure that my friend Tommy has kept touch with him through the years. I'd be interested to know what that relationship developed in with the country and the problems there. And my stepfather went to Pakistan in the 70s, I believe it was, mid 60s to 70s, and worked for the Ford Foundation there. I think it may have been part of something to do with the Point Four program, but it was particularly with the Ford Foundation.
So your stepfather was in agriculture?
Yes, he was with the United States Department of Agriculture, which they have a big office here. And he would go out. His job was to go with the legal people to the farmers and to tell them what they could or couldn't grow. And because of what they needed, what they didn't need. And he was here at the time that there was a big scandal with Billy Saul Estes in Texas. And it was very distressing to him because he liked his job. He respected all the people. And I remember his being very disappointed that there would be that kind of publicity for the department that he had worked for, paying people to store nothing. So it was, and I guess maybe because he was involved in that, I had a sensitivity to the things going on in the agriculture world. Although my grandparents, none of them were agriculture people; they were business people. But it was still because it was interesting.
Now, where was your family before you came to Stillwater with your mom?
My grandparents lived in Stillwell, Oklahoma. And they had 7 children, my mother being the second of the 7. And they all went to college. It was Depression time for most of them, many of them. And he said, there's nothing else I can give you except for you to go to college. But he was in his day, the entrepreneur of his day. He had been a book salesman from Tennessee, and then he came to Oklahoma and was selling books here, and then he and his brother decided they were going to start the telephones in Oklahoma. And so they borrowed $500 through and bought a telephone exchange piece unit from Sears Roebuck. Then they started stringing the wires. Then they started getting customers, and then it grew to be bought out many years later by Continental Telephone. So it was, it was a major, it was truly a pioneer.
And what was your mother's maiden name?
Holt, Holt.
Okay. Now, getting back to your time at OSU, did you spend a lot of time in the library?
Yes, actually, I started in the library probably because I did join a sorority and they had study hours. It was very important that they were interested in your doing well in school as well as making sure you'd done well before you got there. And we had our study hour here. And whatever nights it was, Tuesday and Thursday probably, we had to spend 3 hours here. And they counted the hours, we wrote it down, we checked in, we checked out. And from that, too, we learned to use the library. Because we were here, it was easy to get to the stacks and the places we needed to look something up. So it was always very important to me. As a little girl living here, I would walk from the school where I was at Eugene Field, which is now at the end of 6th Street and is a grocery store. But I would walk to the downtown library, which was at 6th and Husband or there, after school. And I could either be at the library waiting for my mother or I could be in the teacher's lounge waiting for my mother. So the library was very important to me, and always it has been.
So you would have remembered the earlier library, too, on campus?
Probably, but I probably didn't have much reason to be here for the earlier library. This was the one. I've even jumped in the pool at slumber parties.
So you were well acquainted with the library. What are there other memories you have of it as well? Or,
yes, with
slumber
the
parties?
homecoming parade. That was always fun to make floats and to stay up late and have bleary eyes doing that. And I rode in a parade on one of the floats one time. I think it was Education Queen, and we were on the back of a car. And another year I was riding the bicycles for mortarboard. That was fun. We rode tandem, double bicycles. And that was always fun. Sometimes, some years it was very cold. Some years it was just like it is this weekend. Lovely.
Now, you mentioned that you were in a sorority and that you lived at home part of the time and in the sorority part of the time.
And that was great for me. It was, and in the sorority house, we changed roommates every 6 weeks. And we just took the drawers out of the chests and took it to the next room we'd been assigned to with the new roommates, and the clothes hanging in the closet, and took it down. That's all we had to move. But it gave us a wonderful opportunity. In fact, I'm here this weekend staying with a friend that was in my sorority and picked up a friend that was in my sorority, who then later also introduced me to the man that became my husband. So it's all intertwined. It's a great mixture of good times and studies, and a lot of the girls, I was one of probably 10 in my sorority class that stayed here to graduate without being married. In those days, many girls got married in their sophomore year, their junior year, maybe even freshman year, and it was just, the timing was such that I wasn't going to get married during college. I had things I needed to do, I wanted to do, and probably hadn't met the right man either. So, but I did meet him my junior year, and then we got engaged, and then I ended up going to do graduate study at Kansas State for a semester, and then came back, and we got married right after he graduated.
Do you want to talk a little bit about how you two met?
Oh my goodness, it's all around here. Yes, it was great fun. My friend and I that we drove up here for homecoming with, we were walking through the student union, and in those days you dated many people at the same time. You could have a date at 8 o'clock and one at 10 o'clock, and with one boy one night and the other. It was told to us that this was a way you got acquainted with personalities and to know which kind you really liked the personalities of. So I took that seriously and enjoyed every bit of it. And it ended up that I was walking through the union with my friend Martha, and it so happened our sorority was having a party, and I had 3 boys that I really kind of liked and was dating, but I couldn't invite any one of them because they would know that I didn't invite them to the party. So I thought I needed a dark horse. So I told Martha, I said, I have got to find someone else to take to the party. And then as we were walking through the union, I looked over there, and here was this tall blonde, or I guess he was tall, but he was a blonde, very blonde man sitting with some of the international students playing bridge. And I thought, well, now he's a cute Swede. I probably should take him to the party, just jokingly. And she said, he's not a Swede. She said, he's from my hometown, and my boyfriend knows him very well. And I said, well then, okay. Tell him that I would like to get to know him or maybe invite him to this party. So as time went on, and not very long, her boyfriend went out and was studying with my husband, who lived at the REA building and cleaned the place and also took the storm calls when the REA people lost their electricity and they could live there for free. And so he went out to study with him, and he said, oh, I know someone that would like to have a date with you. And my husband's name is Cotton, and so Cotton said to Dyke, who was my friend Martha's boyfriend, who wants to have a date, and he said, oh, Jerry Ann Lewis, and he said, you've been in my wallet, and Martha's friend said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? My not yet boyfriend pulled out his wallet, pulled out a picture of me that had been in the old collie. When he came back from the Army, he'd been in the Army for 2 years, and he'd seen me with somebody at a softball game, and he thought, I'm going to have a date with her when I can afford a sport coat. And so I invited him to the party. He called me, and I invited him to the party. We went to the party and had a wonderful time, and then he didn't call. Well, then a friend of mine came in town, and she was going out with somebody, but they didn't have a car. And I said, well, you can borrow my daddy's fishing car, but you have to go to the Pizza Palace, whatever it was called, down on Washington Street, because that's where Cotton works on Saturday nights. And he may be there and come in, and you have to tell him that you're my friend. This was Bonnie Carberry. She lived in Guthrie, and she'd left school, and she was now working in the city. And she was coming back here just for the weekend. And so they went in the pizza place after they'd gone to a movie. And this big, tall person walks in and says, I've hit a car out here. Oh, it's a black Dodge. And Bonnie says, it's Jerry Ann's dad's car. And so from that, he had to call me and apologize for having hit my dad's car. So then we dated forever. That was it. That was the forever.
So you knew.
So it was meant. It was ordained to have my picture in his wallet. Who would have thought?
Right.
You know,
what
it was just,
chances?
what are the chances?
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Talking about the sorority house and everything and dating, were there curfews?
Oh, definitely.
That you remember?
Yes, the lights would flick when it was time to come in, and I think probably it was 11 o'clock on the weekends.
Okay.
And you were really in trouble if you missed the curfew, which one time I did. I went to Tulsa to a basketball game, and we got back after the hours, and another girlfriend and I had driven over, and you didn't drive very many places from campus at that time, or I didn't, and my house mother was not happy.
We are not amused. Right. Well, do you remember if the young men at the time had a similar curfew, or if they had one at all?
Well, I don't think they did. I don't really think they did. One of the boys I dated was a basketball player. I don't remember his having a curfew. They lived in an athletic dorm setting. Of course, no girls were allowed there, and no boys were allowed in other than on the first floor of our house. Although we had a houseboy who helped serve our meals and do things around the house, who was in the had a room in the downstairs area where we had our study area at the sorority house. So I guess there were boys in the house, but not upstairs.
And would he have been a student?
Yes, he was a student. That was his job. He was earning money to be able to stay in school.
Okay.
Lots of people with jobs part of the time in school.
Right. Now, with your sorority, was homecoming a big deal?
Oh, definitely. It was.
What was involved?
It was
back
great.
then?
Well, they would at that time, we would have not only a float, but we would have a house decoration. And, you know, I suppose they were costly. I don't remember anything about the cost, but they somehow came up with it. And one time, the motor went out underneath the float, and we had two of the fraternity boys. And at that time, you just did it with I don't think you did it with another sorority or fraternity. You just did it with your own house. And we had helpers, and two of the boys just were under there moving the thing along. And of course, we would have probably been disqualified had they known someone was under there in danger.
Mm-hmm.
But we won. It was Jack Frost, and we had three beautiful turntables with red and yellow and orange that were going around, and Jack Frost was sitting up there with his big paintbrush. It was beautiful. It was really lovely.
So
real fall.
What year would that have been?
That was probably 58 or 59, and then the other one, maybe in 57, was Cinderella's Pumpkin.
Mm-hmm.
And that was beautiful. And that was actually, I think, designed by the friend we're staying with, Suzanne Fenton Carpenter. And she was quite artistic and wonderful. So that was a really beautiful one.
What else do you remember about the homecoming events when you were in college?
Well, we would go to the games, and we were dressed up pretty much. I don't remember it being that cold. I remember going, and we would sometimes have mums if we had a date. I happened to be dating a football player, so I went to the game with girlfriends, but I did have a corsage, so that was fun. And I don't remember too much other than it was always the ball game was special, and then they had I think they must have had a dance afterwards in the evening. They didn't have any basketball like they do now, and we did have pep rallies, but they would be on campus somewhere. And I think I was here, or maybe it was the year before I was here, that they had a panty raid in one of the new dorms. The guys somehow got in to the dormitory, and that's what they called it. They just took stuff out of the girls' rooms, And I think they got in a lot of trouble for that. But I don't think I wasn't in the dorm, so I don't know whether it was that year or whether it was another year.
Okay, so that was.
But it was new. It was Stout Hall.
It was
Stout Hall.
Okay. Now, which sorority were you in?
I was in Kappa Alpha Theta, which is why Theta Pond is named Theta Pond, because their original house was across the street from the pond when OSU started, or when A&M started, and so they were. It was a very, very one of the first ones here long ago, and so it had a lot of history also, which was fun. But the house is at the way end of the street, a big Tudor house, and it was great. We had a wonderful time. And when I was here, they had their rush in the dormitory because it was being refurbished and made bigger. So I didn't think anything about it because I hadn't been except to dinners. They invited the Stillwater girls to dinners during the spring of their senior year so that they'd have a chance to get better acquainted with them, which they didn't really get to do too much. Although we had summer parties all over the state. And one year I was rush chairman, and the girls in the different cities like Edmond or Ada or Ponca City or Oklahoma City, they would plan the party, invite the girls that they were interested in maybe pledging, and then our rush team would be in a car, and there would be about 8 of us that would go to all the parties. They were actually pretty lavish, interesting, cute invitations, and wish I'd saved them because it was very creative, everything was. And then several years after that, it became, when the kids began to work in the summers all the time, it became too difficult for everybody to do that. And which is probably a good idea.
It sounds like you would have been very busy then.
It was very busy, and it was a creative kind of thing. And you were meeting people. And I went to summer school in Colorado one summer, and the chairman at the house called me and said, there's a girl that's coming to college from Greeley, Colorado. I was in Boulder, and she said, would there be any chance of your meeting her? And I said, well, certainly I'd be glad to. Give me her number, and I'll call her and see if we can make an arrangement to meet each other. And we did. And 2 other of my best friends who were in other sororities, we were all there together for the summer. And my friend Judy came over from Greeley. I didn't know her at the time, but she came over, and we became best friends forever, and she was my maid of honor. Now lives in Dallas, very near me. We do lots of things together. She's coming this weekend, too.
Now, how many women would you say were living in the sorority house?
I think there were probably 80 to 90, maybe 80 to 100. I think now they can house maybe more than that. And we were never allowed to live off campus. You could move in if you were a sophomore. But I was able to move in because they had expanded the house. I did move in January after I had pledged. So I was there the second semester of my freshman year and a good bit of my sophomore year. And then I did my student teaching, and then I finished a semester early because I lived in town and I did summer schools a lot. So I was able to finish early, and but still came back and graduated.
Well, and speaking of summer school, it sounds like you started, from what I understand, you started college
Yes.
this summer right after you graduated
We
from
took
high
4
school.
hours, a whole group of us. It was kind of the thing to do, was to take the 4-hour English class, and you got it over with, because that was going to be the most difficult to work in, doing a paper during the fall semester when everything else was new. So we took it in the summer and we wrote a paper every other day. I mean, truly, and Mrs. Orr was our instructor, and it was wonderful. She was absolutely fantastic. Loved her, loved the class. She taught us great. It was no problem after having written a paper every other day almost to write papers when they came up in college. Mm-hmm. It was a great experience, and that intensified writing was very valuable.
And from what I understand, the week you started was the same week that the university had its name changed.
Yes, it was. And that was, that was pretty exciting. I don't know that we really knew what it meant because we'd always loved Oklahoma A&M, but, we became a university. I don't know that there were any classes that changed or whatever, but I guess it gave it a broader chance for the future, for expansion and that kind of thing. And it was great. We loved being a part of it. And they no longer wore beanies. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that got lost, but when we got here, years before, I remember being in high school watching the kids that were on campus as freshmen would wear these little orange and black beanies that had a little whirly thing on top. And I remember when we came, they didn't have them. Not that we wanted them, right. But they didn't have them.
So it was both the girls and the boys.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure.
So by the time you got here,
they didn't have to do that.
Now, you mentioned Theta Pond a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. Do you remember hearing stories of the alligator in Theta Pond?
I don't. I don't remember the alligator. All I remember was throwing people. They threw the mm-hmm. boys in Theta Pond when they got pinned mm-hmm. or engaged. And that was always sort of, I guess, fun. I don't know that there was an alligator in there.
Okay.
That may have come later.
And you had mentioned earlier too that they had expanded your the sorority house.
Yes.
Were there issues at the time with space and housing?
I think probably so. They were building lots of new dormitories. Everything was growing and expanding, and the sorority houses were considered part of campus housing, mm-hmm. and therefore that took part of the pressure off the university for having had to do that. And I don't know about the land situation, whether the land is owned by the campus. I just don't know that. It seemed to me there might have been something that the universities worked with the national organizations to help them be able to provide more housing. That was probably the way it was. And then I went later to start a chapter of my sorority at Kansas State that year, right after I graduated in January. Mm-hmm. Got a fellowship to go to start that chapter at Kansas State University. Okay. And KU had a good chapter of my sorority, and they came and helped us do the parties. And the other girl from Ohio and I did it, and we came in. I went to that 50th anniversary this spring and saw those girls that we had met and had pledged that spring. And we had, of the 30, there were 17 that were able to still come. Mm-hmm. And it was great, and they took us around and showed us where they had originally been in the house, what some of the stories were, because we basically pledged them, trained them. We moved to an apartment, that way we could learn to sing, we could teach them the songs and do all the things that you would like to do as a group, and then we left. Now, I think in the sorority system, the Greek system, they send someone to stay with that chapter for that first year. I don't think they did at that time. So we didn't realize quite the pressure we were under to teach them everything, to be the officers, to be giving the rush party, to do everything. So they were some special girls to have done that, and it was a real pleasure to see what had been accomplished. It was wonderful, and the leadership skills that are taught in a smaller setting like that are really something that you take with you. In organizations, in the church you go to, in the ladies and women's groups in the community, and in the state. I didn't happen to get involved in any of the state political things because we lived in New York in the summers and then traveled some in the golf tour in the winter. Then we went permanently to New England, to Boston, where my husband had his first position as a golf professional. And then he went to we would go to Florida in the winters, so there wasn't any place that I was going to be able to invest myself totally all year long. So I just, was able to do whatever I could do in my church and in the Golf Wives, and I did meet. There weren't any alumni groups of OSU in those places because we were on the East Coast and they didn't know anything past the Mississippi. So it was really, probably my sorority had a group in every city up in that area. So I tended to be involved occasionally with them, and that was an entree to meet young women.
Mm-hmm. Now, you'd mentioned the leadership skills that it taught you. What other campus activities and organizations were you involved with? Because you mentioned earlier that there were a couple of others.
Well, most of them were, I started out with the honoraries with the academics. That was probably my main forte. And then the education student council. And I was on that. And then the women's student council, which was called the Association of Women Students. And I worked in that, and then we planned things for the entire women organization, all the women on campus. It had nothing to do with the sororities or anything else. It was for all the women. And it was great. And Dean Patchen was the Dean of Women at that time, and learned a great deal from her. You have to realize this was 57 to 61, and there was a great deal of unrest going on in the country with integration. And I was very positive about the equality of all of us. And we really had no black athletes or very many black students here at the time. I had been integrated in my senior year in high school here, and I felt that it was totally appropriate. And so when they had a few sit-ins here in town at the drugstore, I thought, well, absolutely. This is something, I wasn't radical about it, but I just thought, people need to know that this is the thing that is appropriate. It needs to be spoken as a positive, and so I would go. Well, I was then soon president of the Women's Association, and I was asked not to do that. And I, at the time, did not rebel against that. I felt, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that. But if it were to be done now, I would probably have had an answer and say, we all have to make our choices. And in my opinion, this is the way we need to go. Mm-hmm. And then I think it was that year, one of the first black football players and first black basketball players came here. And one of them happened to have been from my boyfriend's hometown. I think it was Fritz Greer was his name. And that was, I didn't know my boyfriend at that time, but in later years when we talked about it, he was from Duncan, Oklahoma. So that was, and then as we've seen now, I noticed that this weekend there's the black golf tournament. And I thought, good for them. That's, they certainly went a different road when they had to come here. I'm sure it was not easy. And even though we're not the Deep South, there was still probably a lot of difficulty for them along the way. And it's very good to see the success. And we went to the bowl game where Barry Sanders had been named Heisman Trophy winner, so that was special. We have a picture, myself and our daughter, with him, and that was fun. He's a nice man.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned some of the sit-ins and so on. What was the general feeling in town, do you think, at the time?
I think probably there was a positive feeling about it. I don't think that it went too far. I think that it was a natural thing, it was probably at the drugstores, and that same drugstore downtown on the corner of 4th and Main. I don't remember who owned that drugstore, but I would go there in high school to lunch every day, our senior year, with all my friends. We had a ham salad sandwich every day. And behind the counter working there was Joanne Roderick. And Myron Roderick, they were dating at the time, and he was sitting down at the other end. And of course, we didn't know who they were, but somebody had pointed out that he was a wrestler on campus and very well known. And of course, I didn't know her at all, but we all thought that was so special, So in the later years then, I still have lots of close friends here, and she's involved with lots of them in her sorority life, and then we've all grown old together. And, and he's certainly done a wonderful thing for this campus and for the Wrestling Hall of Fame and all of the international, Olympic, everything. So that was kind of a little aside from having lived in Stillwater, and they should kind of start early, recognizing some of these good things.
Well, and you mentioned, that would be one student hangout off campus. You mentioned swims a little earlier.
Yes, there weren't any bars, of course, because it was a dry state. I'm sure that there were parties where it was available somehow, but it was never anything that we became accustomed to at all, which I think served us very well, because it's never been important. I like a glass of wine at a nice dinner, if we're out, something like that, but it never became a habit that was associated with having a good time. So, I'm sorry that some of the future generations haven't had that experience, to know that that's not necessary in the part of their entertainment. But, they do have a good time. And I don't know what is it 21 or 18? Is it 21?
20.
Well, they seem to know about it earlier, don't they?
So, were there any which theaters do you remember?
The Aggie Theater and the Leachman Theater. There was also a campus theater where I had one of my first dates with my husband, and we went to see Roman Holiday. It's where one of my high school classmates has his Pizza Hideaway now. That was where it was. And Richard Dermer was in my high school class, and he was the editor of our yearbook. And then he went on to discover the game Penta, and then he's also a world-class kite flyer. Very unusual, very interesting man, very smart man, and was great in our class. We loved him. And then we've had lots of class reunions here too, so I've gotten to come back occasionally for those. None of the years, 20 years we were away. So other than to come back to see my family, we were never here. And then they died when we moved to Dallas, so we didn't get back in time to have much time to come back to see them here. But we did Christmases most of the time. So that was great.
So you had the off-campus hangouts. What about with your friends, with the other women in your sorority, or sometimes on dates? What were the on-campus things that you would do?
I guess we went to parties at the fraternity houses and had our own parties. They were pretty much in-house or something going on. We still had proms at the student union in the ballroom. They would have a big maybe a Sigma Chi dance or a Beta dance, and they were costumed many times. I remember going to a pajama party at the SAE house, and we all had to wear, of course I wore flannel pajamas, but that was fun. We always had party pics, and those were always fun. I still have those, and they're hysterical. And then there was a kid party at the Beta house, and you dressed like a kid, high socks and bows in your hair and little short dresses, and the guys looked awfully funny in their short shorts and bows and hats, and kid hats. And then there was a half formal that the Fidels had, which you could either use the top or bottom, and the top would be formal and the bottom would be jeans. Or jeans weren't as popular at that time, but I guess we all had a pair of jeans. But I don't remember much about jeans. We just clothes. We liked nice clothes. We liked pretty clothes. We weren't obsessed with it, but we did like them, and wanted to look our best. And wore hats to church and gloves to church.
Well, and you still had the dress code on campus, too.
Yes, we did. And we took our house mother to church every Sunday. Somebody did. It was assigned who would do that. And aside from that, one of my daughters went to Southern Methodist University. Actually, they both did, but one pledged a sorority. And I was at a mother's thing there. And the lady they were introducing the new house mother. And they were telling a little bit about her and where she had grown up. It was the daughter of my house mother. My house mother had a daughter that was now my daughter's house mother.
What are the chances?
Absolutely. It was, and that daughter, my daughter at SMU, her daughter had gone to that, my house mother's daughter had gone to OU. So it was all mixed up. I thought, isn't this a small world?
That's amazing.
It is. It was fun.
So do you remember beyond homecoming and some of the sorority parties, what some of the traditions were on campus during the years you were here?
Yes, the varsity review was great fun. And it was, I think at that time it was predominant, and the spring sing, fall sing. And I think maybe the dormitories by that time were also doing it. So it wasn't strictly a Greek thing. I'm not sure about varsity review, but it was always fun. They always had great shows. And one of my friends was Miss Varsity Review. And actually, I wore her wedding dress in my wedding. And so, there's just a lot of intertwined things. But that was always a great show. I mean, there were lots of talented people that helped put all that together in all of those groups. And that was really at a time that you don't think of. We didn't do much television. We'd had television for a few years, but you didn't have the hoopla and see all the big shows, the big musicals coming through like they do in the cities now. We may have been to Oakland, to New York City occasionally, maybe once or twice. I went once. I took my grandparents once and my mother, but I don't. I didn't learn how to do that. I didn't learn how to do it, but there were plenty of talented people in the arts here at OSU that certainly knew how to do all of that.
And did you have bands coming?
Oh, yes. The Shadow Lake 8 were great. And then that was our own campus band, out of our own band people. And one of my boyfriends played the piano with that one. And I liked to dance. So actually, I didn't keep going with him because I wanted someone to dance with. If he was playing the piano, who could I dance with? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was kind of fun. But they were great musicians, and they performed in the summers at different places like Noel, Missouri, and resort places around the country. And then Les Brown and his orchestra, the Allied Arts, all those came. I remember singing Ray Charles and a big jazz artist, Ramsey Lewis and his jazz people, Oscar Levant. I may have seen him when I was in high school because, the townspeople could also go. And it was great experience to have all of these wonderful arts come to a college town, which I think is still one of the reasons that lots of people move back to college towns, because at one time it was much less expensive to be able to enjoy the sports and the arts in college towns that were sort of autonomous, like the College Stations and the Wacos and the Stillwaters, rather than city schools, because the prices are much more reasonable, because they can't get the $75 tickets like they can from people in the cities. Mm-hmm. So, but I don't know about that anymore. I think they seem to pay quite a bit for their football tickets.
Yes. Now, speaking of football, do you remember the first Pistol Pete mascot?
I don't. Isn't that funny? I do remember who it was, and I remember knowing the story of Eaton, Frank Eaton, but I don't remember the costume. Okay. I don't know. I remember, I just don't, it's strange that I wouldn't remember that. Maybe if I saw a picture from that time or looked through my yearbook and looked at it, I probably would. Mm-hmm. But I knew it was Pistol Pete. I knew, that there was a mascot.
Now, just to change direction a little bit, what were some of the changes that you noticed occurring on campus during the years that you were here? And you had a broader view of it since you'd grown up here. Right. So you'd been able to see a longer version.
Well, it may have been a little like watching a child grow, though. You don't see the inches as they creep up. You don't see the changes because you're right there. I think we loved the student union. It was a great meeting place. And between classes, you could go up there and dance. They had a jukebox, and it was acceptable to do that. And I don't know that in some of the next generations they danced very much. So I think they kind of lost that sociability. But when I came, I mean, they were dancing through college. That was, and not wastefully. It was the way, one of your entertainments, and free. You know, it was pretty free, and having Cokes in the student union and that kind of thing, and going through the cafeteria line to have lunch if you wanted to not eat wherever you were living. But I don't know when the changes happened, because I got a letter after we were living in New York for my husband's job. And the question they sent to me, I think they must have sent it to a lot of the student leaders and the mortar board in particular. And they said, how do you, about working women, do you feel, this was the question, something like this, do you feel working women are more fulfilled than non-working women? Well, I had taught school for 2 years while my husband traveled on the golf tour, and I would certainly have rather been out there. But on the other hand, that was our opportunity for him to get to go do that, and so I was glad to do that. But I also had a friend whose mother worked as a stand-up clerk in an Anthony store, and I knew that that was not a fulfillment for her. She was doing what she needed to do to make sure her kids got to college after her husband was killed in the war. My mother worked because she was a widow. She was fulfilled to a certain point that she felt that she was doing what she needed to do. But so far as working because you're fulfilled, I said, that's only if you're an artist or have a passion for something. Otherwise, your work is for a reason. And it may be fulfilling, it may be for the money, or it may be for the purpose of getting a kid through college. And I can't measure fulfillment. I don't know the word fulfillment in that regard, because I think there can be many successes in that realm. And I think maybe the working women, that may have been some of the changes. When we went to college, we really had very few choices of things we might become, or we thought we did. And that one was teacher, one was secretary, one was maybe physical therapy. That was another one that I considered. But they weren't big time jobs necessarily. And you didn't think about going out and owning a business necessarily. There may have been those that did, but I didn't. And even though I came from a family that they did own a business. But it was, that may have been a change. The women were starting to change. It was the time of Betty Friedan. That was one of the books we read. There was beginning to be change of the women becoming more independent, which that was okay. And then it got so extreme when I had children that it was almost like if you didn't work, you weren't of any value. It sort of went way over. And then it kind of, and there were lots of women that didn't have families deliberately because they felt like they weren't going to do that. And maybe by choice, maybe not. They may have been influenced. And I remember Betty Friedan in later years apologizing to a generation of women whom she misled that there was only one way. And I think that was a great learning for me to know in life there's not just one way. You know, you have to be understanding, tolerant, look at both sides. And I did some debating, and I think that there needs to be debate starting in the 3rd grade, because there are always both sides to every issue. And we need to be better informed about everything. And I think our generation was maybe a little behind on that for a time, and that maybe the future generations began to be a little more involved in what important issues needed to be discussed, and for us to be a part of.
And it sounds like there was change as far as the racial makeup on the
Definitely,
campus during the
definitely.
time you were here.
Yes, and it wasn't, to me, it wasn't particularly noticeable because I had had it in high school too, and it was something I agreed with and was very positive about.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have some favorite memories of OSU that you haven't talked about yet?
Well, I don't know. I think it's the friendships, the people that have continued to be like my sisters, being an only child. The investment in each other during those years that were pretty carefree in a lot of ways were wonderful. Being in each other's weddings, going on girl trips, going on the sneak to Dallas with the seniors that were left at the sorority house. There were just lots of. We didn't go very far. We didn't do much in Oklahoma City. We didn't do much in Tulsa. Everything was right here. You know, it was sufficient. It was the people, the games. We might go to Tulsa to a game, but we wouldn't go very far to a game. Maybe some did, but I had a great time here. And part of it was social, but part of it was academic. I mean, I was very focused on my academics. I wanted to do well. I wanted to achieve. And my mother instilled that in me, that it was extremely important. If you had God-given gifts, then you treat them well. And so it was an all-encompassing campus experience for me.
We had talked earlier about how you met your husband. And you mentioned a little bit about how you'd moved around over the years. But do you want to talk a little bit about what you two did after you graduated from college?
Sure.
and how all of that developed?
Yeah, we've had a golden life in a lot of ways, and we have been married 50 years this year. And my mother and father were not particularly delighted that I was going to marry him. And I broke an engagement with him once because as an only child, I wanted my parents to like this situation, and they weren't verbally against it, but they weren't particularly interested in a golf pro. And I didn't know he was going to be a golf pro. He was studying to be a CPA, so I thought, well, that means he's smart. And I didn't really know about his golf, but lo and behold, later I learned that he'd been national junior champion in the United States. And so I guess I could have assumed maybe that he might want to do golf somewhere. And he was on the golf team here, but he had gone to the University of Houston the first 2 years, which was the national championship team. And as a national champion, that was where he gravitated to, got a wonderful scholarship supposedly there. But he was from a non-college family and didn't have any help. No one to advise him, no one to have had any experience. So when he went there, he had no car, no money, nothing. So he bummed a ride to the golf course. He gave half of his food stipend to another golfer that had no food stipend. And then after a year and a half, it was such a struggle that he decided that he could not stay down there. So he came back and came here for part of the spring semester, and then realizing he did not know what he wanted to do. He was spinning his wheels. I didn't know him at this time. Then he joined the Army. It was peacetime, and he says the whole time he was in the active Army, he kept peace because there was no fighting anywhere. And he was actually on the airplane to be sent to Korea, and this was, again, before I knew him. And lo and behold, they called his name to get off the plane. And he didn't have any idea why. They were in Seattle or wherever it was. They were changing planes to go to Korea. And he had been traded. At that time, they had football teams and golf teams and basketball teams on all the posts around the country where the Army could be entertaining themselves. And they needed a golfer at Lawton, which was 15 miles from Duncan, Oklahoma, his hometown. So he was sent to Lawton to play on the post team, and he could type real well and had had some college, so they put him in charge of supplies or something so that he could keep track of everything and type and do all that. And then he was to meet the general at noon every day at the golf course. And Gigi Rodriguez was there but didn't make the team. So that was kind of interesting. But anyway, he was traded to go to Lawton on that post golf team by because wherever he had been, Fort Lewis in Colorado, I guess, needed a football player. And it was Ralph Guillaume, who had been at the University of Miami. I guess I wasn't familiar with the name, but all the men knew that name. So that's where he was during the service. And then after he finished his 2 years of active duty, he came to OSU to school and got a partial scholarship. He played on the team he'd been a basketball player too, so he played to start the fall before the junior college players could be eligible for the second semester to play. He played as the practice team for Mr. Iba, because he had been an outstanding basketball player too, but he didn't come here to play basketball. But and then he played on the golf team also, and became All-American here. And we are just thrilled at what golf has done through the years here, and they've certainly done done really wonderful things for the reputation of the school and the golf.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you've lived a number of places.
And we did. We went, he worked as an accountant in Oklahoma City for a year or so. And then Oklahoma City Open came through there, and he decided to try out for it. And he did well, led the first day, and then didn't lead. But he decided from that, all of his friends were there that he had played competitive golf with for years through all the parts of the United States. And he said, "Would you think about going and doing this?" And I said, "What did I know?" "Oh, sure, this would be great." So anyway, it has been a wonderful experience, and we've made great friends everywhere. And when we lived in New York, in the summers, particularly 5 years in the summer, and the pro there was an old Italian, Jack Petroni. He wore a suit and tie to do his teaching, and he became ill while we were there, and so for 3 years Cotton ran his business for him, and it was right outside New York City in Westchester County called Appowamus, and it was really a wonderful thing. And one of our best friends, it was Terry Wilcox, who had also been a golfer here, and he and my husband had grown up together, and he was at the Appowamus first, and then when we decided to go and do the tour, Terry went on to another job, and Cotton took the job he had had at the Appowamus. And then we've kept touch with them all through the years, and they're great friends, and they live in Palm Springs area now. And then from there, we began to have children, so we had 2 daughters, and then we went to Boston and lived outside Boston for the next 13 years, really raised our daughters there. And it was a great experience to be there.
Where outside Boston?
Danvers, okay. Massachusetts, and his club was in Salem, Massachusetts. But interestingly enough, Danvers, Massachusetts was where the witch hangings were. And they changed their name because they did not want to be associated with it. It was Salem Village at that time. Salem Village became Danvers, so that they didn't have anything to do with that. And but the house is still there, one of the ones that was hanged. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it was quite an experience, and it was really great. And we go back every summer to visit friends there at the club where he was. And but we did leave in the winter, and oftentimes we would lease our house to a hockey player for the Boston Bruins, so that then we had the money to go and lease a place in Florida for 3 months. Mm-hmm. So that was, and we put our kids with the other golf pros from New England and New York, would often do the same thing. And we had sort of a colony of golf pros and wives and kids that all went to school down there. Mm-hmm. And we called ourselves the high-class gypsies. But it was great, and it didn't hurt our kids in their academics at all. And in fact, I'd been a teacher was helpful. They could take their work with them. I'm not sure their teachers in New England were very happy with it. But we decided the best place to be was with Dad. So that was the best place. And we didn't need to be in the snow, mm-hmm. In his career. So that was okay.
Yes,
then we went back to Dallas.
Golf balls
yes, and then we finally got back to God's country, mm-hmm. and have been in Dallas now. He was 25 years at Prestonwood Country Club in Dallas, and went there to help build a second course for them. And he had one owner. He worked for one owner for 25 years, and he was a blessing for us.
That's unheard of. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And my husband was quite a free thinker in his own way. A maverick. He wanted to do things the way he felt should be done by the professional, and this man let it be done that way. He didn't have a board telling him what he needed to be doing. Mm-hmm. And it was God's way putting him in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's been retired now. And they had a great party, big party for him when he was turned 70, had been at the club 25 years and was retiring. So that was almost 4 years ago.
Okay.
So,
Well, just to wrap up, what impact would you say that OSU had on your lives?
it's just in the bones, truly. In fact, when we moved way off and were in the East Coast for so long, we missed everybody. We knew no one there except for our one golf friend, and then they left there eventually. But he said, anytime we go to a bowl game, we'll go. Well, in that time period, we weren't always going to bowl games. I think he felt very safe to say that. But then we began to go to bowl games, and we would come home for Christmas and either come early and go to the bowl game or stay and go to the bowl game over the New Year's time. And we've grown with the knowledge that life is just good. Whatever happens is supposed to happen, and OSU is. Our blood is orange. That's all I can tell you.
What advice would you give to OSU students today?
Just savor the time you're here and don't hurry it. Enjoy it. Make sure you get in on all of it. Be the spectator at the sports. Be the participant in the intramurals. Be the participant in the things that you can sing at the join a club. Do something that in the dorms, if they have the social groups now, do it. Try to be an officer so that you're really involved. Try to build a float for homecoming. Be a part of it all rather than just a spectator. Spend some time at the library, but don't spend all your time at the library because there'll be more memories of all of it if you can have all of it.
Well, I'd like to thank you for sitting down with us today. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to add at this point? Or?
I'll probably think about it tomorrow.
Okay.
But it was my pleasure to share what OSU has meant to me. And I really did start when it became OSU, and that was pretty special. And that same week, it became the Big Eight. OSU joined the Big Eight. And that was, I guess I'm a historical figure at this point in my family. And, and that's one of the things. You don't grow old if you keep the memories of all those special times that were when you were young and got to this place.
Well, thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed being here with you.